Hi everyone. Today I'm going to walk you through The Road Forward. So, The Road Forward is a very truly inspiring and emotional documentary. So, the film is based in Canada and focuses on the stories of the Indigenous peoples and mainly the importance of the Indian National Congress. The film is directed by Marie Clements and it really blends together more of a true documentary style and incorporates lots and lots of musical elements to really recount the history of the Indian National Congress, which is an Indigenous political movement in Canada. The story highlights the journey of Indigenous resistance to many Canadian colonial policies that were going on at the time and really the ongoing struggle that still happens today for Indigenous rights and identity. Like I said earlier, the film mixes a lot of music. It also adds a lot of old archive footage and many reenactments to really showcase the message of resistance and cultural survivance. Marie Clements, the producer and director, is a Matisse filmmaker. She also does some playwrights and screenwriting. She comes from the Matisse people, who are actually recognized as three of the main Indigenous peoples in Canada, alongside First Nations and Inuit. The Métis have historically been involved in the fur trade and actually played a very important role in the development of the Canadian society. So down there in the bottom right, I have a couple pictures of the Métis people, and then there's Marie Clements. And really, through a lot of her works, you can see the Métis culture being expressed. The road forward is mainly focused on the history of the Indian National Congress. The INC was founded in the 1940s in response to many oppressive policies that the Canadian government had towards Indigenous peoples. The Indian Act in 1867, all the way until the start of the INC in the 1940s, many Indigenous tribes were very oppressed by the Canadian government. And this film really takes the audience through the story of the INC's founding, its activities, and its impact on Indigenous rights and the rights Indigenous people hold even to this day. The role of Indigenous women was actually very important in this movement, and Clements highlights how Indigenous women were at the very forefront of activism and really trying to preserve their cultural identity. The main history behind this film is all through the INC, and it really started because of these crazy restrictions, like I said earlier, really between everything on their cultural practices, their government systems, land, education, and the INC really sought to challenge these restrictions and push for a true Indigenous political agency. The film really weaves together between a lot of historical documentary style footage, musical performances, and interviews that are very dramatized, and all these things really create a present day, upbeat, and engaging narrative for the audience. Visually, the audience will see a lot of archive footage of the INC in the 1940s, its come abouts, and a lot of present day experts and historical figures analyzing how the INC came about, who the important people were, and honestly, the film connects many of the struggles in the 1940s compared to similar struggles the Indigenous culture still faces today. The cinematography throughout the film plays a key role in establishing the emotional and historical tone. The archive footage is integrated with lots of fictionalized scenes, or in other words, reenactments. It really allows the audience to connect deeper and actually see what was happening, not just hear about it. Many of these scenes used soft focus or even a sepia toned visual to really establish the sense of history and bring them back into the actual time period. And when the film shifts into the musical sequences, really the choreography down to the lighting, the set design all focus on the themes that Marie Clements is trying to push, like cultural survivance, resistance, and identity. The music is often energetic and emotional, and actually all the artists are contemporary Indigenous artists. And Marie Clements actually wrote or helped co-write all the musical sequences. So, like I said before, she really has a hand in everything and expresses a lot of her art through the Matisse culture. So the sound design is another important role in this documentary. There is actually a lot of added sound effects that bring out a lot of drama in many of the emotional interviews. And another part is the real sounds of ongoing activism really capture the idea of the INC. And through the contemporary and traditional sounds throughout the film, it really bridges together the past and present day struggles that the indigenous people face. The continuous pace of musical numbers, reflective moments, and somber storytelling all play a part in exposing the misrepresentations of the indigenous culture. Another important piece of context is the use of newspaper clippings from the 1950s and 60s. On the right there, I have two screenshots from the actual film, and on the bottom left there, Marie Clements was quoted saying, "I was reading folders and folders of actual newspapers, and there's something about actually handling a document, a paper. It was like partaking in the communication. It was done a half century ago." The audience is quite simple. Its main purpose is to educate the audience about the INC, its history, and how far it has come. And the musical tool of the documentary serves as the emotionally appealing side of it, helping to connect the past and present. The format makes the information easy to process to a variety of audience and ages, combining emotional interviews and musical features engages the audience throughout the entire film. This film had a few of our course themes expressed throughout it. Colonialism in The Road Forward directly targets the way colonialism has left an impact on Indigenous tribes of Canada. There are many and are still many particular policies that are aimed to assimilate and try to erase the certain Indigenous cultures. In 1867, the Constitution Act assigned legislative jurisdiction to Parliament over Indians and Indian land reserved for Indians, more or less known as the Indian Act. It gave the government power and control over First Nations, their identity, political structures, cultural practices, and education. This is truly a great definition of true colonialism. The power the government held over Indigenous people really restricted their freedoms during this time period. The INC was formed in response to these ongoing policies, and the documentary exposes the resistance to the systematic oppression that the Indigenous people faced. The audience is informed through visual reenactments and archive footage. This film is really a great example of the ongoing fight for Indigenous people against the systematic colonial forces pushing their own narrative. Resistance is really the main theme throughout the documentary. The Indian National Congress is the definition of a resistance. It was made to directly challenge the Canadian government's colonial policies over the Indigenous tribes. Throughout the historical evidence, personal interviews, and musical sequences, the viewer can experience the powerful actions and signs the Indigenous people had to show resistance. The INC was really not just a political movement, but more of a cultural movement aimed at reclaiming the traditions, identity, and self-pride for Native cultures. Through the music, dances, and songs it expressed throughout this film serves a key tool in resisting challenges put upon. The last course theme is survivance, and really survivance is showcased in every single clip throughout the film. Even the film itself is an example of survivance, and it really goes hand in hand with resistance. It's more than just survival, but the survival of an actual culture. And the INC is not only depicted as a product of the past, but it serves as a continuum to Native resistance to this day. The documentary really emphasizes the colonial attempt to dismantle Native culture, but it is very clear that communities perish through, they adapt, and they assert their rights. The heroic activism and continued efforts show the Native culture is strong and will not go down without a fight. The impact this film had towards my understandings of the course themes is really quite simple. The Road Forward offers a clear and informative approach to the history behind colonialism, resistance, and survivance in many Canadian Indigenous cultures. The film really showed me on a first-hand basis that these are not just simply concepts, but are true experiences faced by Canadian Indigenous tribes firsthand. The film expresses ways the communities responded to colonial force not by simply resisting, but by actively engaging in cultural resistance and creating the INC. The film showed the importance of cultural expression in the fight for identity. Through many of its musical numbers and cultural experiences, it showed that the cultural practices are not separate from political struggles, but are a true great tool for the ongoing struggle and Native freedoms.